All right, so I briefly went into like the third and fourth dimension, and so I want to make a separate video just about the dimensions to help clarify some introductory notes. So the way I look at dimensions is through different levels. So at first, the levels are first dimension through ninth dimension, through the ninth dimension, right? So the first dimension is just being, right? Then the second dimension will be awareness. Then the third dimension is consciousness, right? And then the fourth dimension is mind, right? Then the fifth dimension will be like the solar dimension of the soul. Then uh, the sixth dimension will be like the spirit. And then the seventh dimension will be the mind and soul. The eighth dimension would be the mind, soul, and spirit. And then the ninth dimension will be the totality of all of those things put together, which is the completed human, right? But that's a undersimplification of what it actually is. Because although my definitions for each dimension has its own merit, when you relate it back to the third dimension, there's more to it. Because in the third dimension, there are nine dimensions within the third dimensions. That's when I talk about the frequencies. So like I say the frequencies because it's easier to say that than to pinpoint each degrees in which plane it's on within the dimension. So I say the third dimensional frequencies, the fourth dimensional frequencies. And I also do it like that because I've experienced things that are in higher dimensions, but I don't have specific knowledge of this is this dimension because of this. So I try not to speak about anything above the fourth dimension. And I really try not to speak anything above the higher fourth dimension because I've only experienced and I know that I've experienced like the lower fourth dimensional realm and the lower fourth dimensional frequencies. And the way I'm using realm is a complete understanding of that dimensional frequency in all its dimensions. So, for instance, in the third dimensional realm, what I'm saying is in that third dimension of the physical forms, you have all nine dimensions within that form, and within all of those nine dimensions, they have nine dimensions of each of their own. So in the first dimension, it has nine dimensions within the first dimension. And then the second dimension has nine dimensions within the second, and so on and so forth. But from the first dimension to the ninth dimension, they're not separate entities. They're all one entity divided by frequency. So when I say third dimensional realm, I'm talking about bodies within bodies within bodies infinitely. I'm talking about realms within realms infinitely. I'm talking about frequencies within frequencies infinitely. Separated but all together. So when I was talking about like the dreams and I was talking about like the higher third dimension, lower fourth dimension, touching the fourth dimension, these are all specified terms that I'm trying to create to have a basis to go on based off of my experience so you can follow along with what I'm saying. But at first, it's going to sound very foreign because other people's have their own definitions. And not to sound like a dick, but sometimes when you listen to other people and what they're saying, they're not speaking from experience. They're speaking from like what they've read and what they've concocted within their mind with contemplation, which is a good thing. We all start at some places, and on a lot of levels, I'm still starting out. But when someone talks with from experience, you can hear within their voice and what they're saying and how they're saying things and how they explain things. That hey, they have put not only thought into it, but they've experienced something and they're trying to relay that experience. So, trying to go into like the third dimension more, So in the third dimension, in my previous recordings, I have like the physical body, the emotional body, and the mental body, the ego, consciousness, terms like that, right? But there are subtle realities just within the moment to moments of lives that prove to us that the third dimension is the totality of all dimensions. It's just in a very small form called the third dimension. And then the fourth dimension is only the third dimension on a higher octave. So when I talk about worlds within worlds, that's what I'm referring to. Like I'm relating everything back to the third dimension because that's where we are physically, and that's where we're anchored now. But I'm really talking about all of the dimensions at the same time. It's like the emotional body and mental body. Yes, they're separate, but they're also one. They're not they don't have a border between them. They're one. And when you make that metaphysical connection, the emotionals and the mental, it blends together. And like that's what I'm trying to like push out is that spirituality isn't separate from secular. It's not separate, even though sometimes I might point out secular things and describe it as secular. I'm only doing that for the distinction of the intellect, because our minds can't understand in a natural state abstract thoughts without abstract creative thinking. And in order to receive abstract creative thinking, you have to experience things that are beyond your normal thought processes. And in order to do that, you have to take in concepts that are foreign to you and contemplate them to see where they match up, if they match up with your experience of life. So I'm trying to get to the point to explain clearly what I want, but it's always going to take time because I'm not used to speaking to people on the level that I'm speaking, and I'm still not at the point of what I want to be speaking about. I just have to give the background to what I'm speaking about. But as I'm giving the background, I'm building the chops up on this certain type of communicative frequency to relay the message. And as I record, I play back and listen, and I see where it gets hazy and where it's really clear, and where it gets hazy, where it gets really clear. And I'm going to keep them like that because it's important for you to know who I am, not by the way I look or not by what I do necessarily, but my process in me speaking to you in a natural way, an authentic way. You hearing my cuts, you hearing my lack of communication skills on some levels, you hearing all that is telling you who I am, which is why at this time I'm not showing my face and I don't do a lot of crazy video edits, because I want you to really listen to what I'm saying, because what I'm saying isn't surface level, even though it sounds like it is. And I keep saying that because I'm trying to get to the point where for us to realize that God isn't external nor is it internal. It's both. We are not living life in a human body, or we're not living life trying to be outside of our body. It's both. We're trying to understand that we can walk through walls. I'm trying to get to the understanding for all of us to have that the multiplicity of things is singular. The difference of things is the same thing. And it's really easy saying that, but trying to communicate that within principles is very difficult. So when I say God is one, but I also say God is many, is the same thing as me saying the third dimension and fourth dimension are the same thing. And people will say the third dimension and fourth dimension are different, but they're not. That's what I'm trying to say. They're the same thing. In our minds, we think they're different because we're thinking about it intellectually. Like our thoughts are intellectual. It's an intellect. It's an intellectual pursuit. It's intellect. Intellect isn't spiritual. Intellect, in some cases, is opposite of spirituality because intellect separates things. Spirituality brings things together. So every time I'm talking to you on an intellectual level. I'm trying to make it natural and not esoteric. Because if I made it esoteric, it'll be an abstract creative logic that's similar to poetry. But if I made it spiritual, then it would be a complete abstract concept that will be similar to scripture. And I don't want it to be like that because we already have spiritual scriptures of the world. We already have esoterica. What I want to try to bring down through the ether is a natural speech. Is a natural speech of this is just life. But it's hard doing that because we all have our preconceived notions of what things are. And as I'm talking to you on like Apo levels, Aporia levels, and Aparici levels, which I'll get into like further down the line. But I'm trying to talk to you on the aspirant level. I'm trying to talk to you on the initiate level. I'm trying to talk to you on the adept level, and I'm trying to talk to you on the master level all at one time. But me myself, I'm an aspirant. I'm at the lowest level. But I'm at the lowest level, but I'm high up the rung enough to be able to conceive of thoughts that aren't necessarily my own. Like I don't think about things in the sense of this is what it is, this is what it is, this is what it is. I question what is. And me questioning what is has got me to the point of thinking completely outside the box and realizing that it's not actually a box, it's a sphere. And to realize that sphere is not actually a sphere, it's nothing. And that nothing is invisible. And that invisible is everything. And passing through that invisible veil is what life is. But on a different level, on a different octave, on a different frequency. So with a third dimensional speaking and on a natural tone like I'm trying to do, I'm I'm co I'm gathering the spheres and then I'm mapping out the degrees. But as I'm talking in the first degree, and then I'll talk in the 13th degree, and then I'll talk into the third degree, but then I'll talk on the 90th degree, and then I'll talk on the 180th degree, but then I'll talk on the 33rd degree, but then I'll talk on the 180 degree, then I'll talk on the 270 degree, then I'll talk on the 144 degree. And I'm doing all of that subconsciously because that's how I've been training my mind to see things through symbolic imagery within my mind, and then translating that into my being, and then pulling that out of my being back into my mind as intellect, but then breaking it back down into, okay, what does this actually mean on everyday life? And that explanation is what I'm saying when I'm talking about third dimensional frequencies or the third dimensional realm, or being in the higher stages of third dimensional reality, touching the fourth dimensional reality. It's not that we're in the third dimensional reality and we're putting our hands up and we're touching the fourth dimension. Is that the third, like, I'm talking about the third dimensional reality vibrations lining up so good to the fourth dimension that the third dimension and fourth dimension become indistinguishable from each other. They start molding into each other. So the way I see the dimensions of 1 through 9 is that they're a gradient. At the bottom is darkness, right? And at the top is light. And it's just from the first dimension to the ninth dimension, it's just a gradient, a smooth gradient. Well, let's take that gradient and put it into a cylinder, right? So now you have a cylinder. At the bottom of the cylinder is complete darkness, and at the top is complete light, and there's a gradient from the top to the bottom. Now, let's make that cylinder a ray of light, and that ray of light is coming from one end, from darkness, and the other end of light. and it's a gradient going in between. Now, recognize that within your own being. Put one side of your being as darkness and one side of your being as light, and and they're connecting, but they're not connecting as a straight line. They're connecting as a gradient, and and that gradient within ourselves of the light and darkness is the natures that I'm talking about of the third dimensional frequencies, because a certain portion of light, a sort of mixture of light and darkness is a certain type of degree, and that certain type of degree put into the mind, into the intellect, at a certain time is a certain frequency. But if you move that time just up or down just a little bit, it changes the frequency, and now it's something completely different, but still the same thing. Is just moved. So it's hard going back and forth between like higher degrees and lower degrees and doing it seamlessly, because one, I don't have practice, and two, we're not trained in a way to think in an abstract way as logical. So instead of thinking logical, one, two, three, four, we're thinking abstract, as in one could be apple, right? And then two could be cow, and three could be X, and four could be Z. And then we put those all together, and it creates an understanding that different things equal different things, and those different things equal similar things to other things that are similar to it, but actually are different from. And having all of those distinctions that contradict each other and form paradoxes, but you're able to link them all back together into one thing, is the degrees I'm talking about. Because one degree is no different from the second degree, other than the placement that it's at. But even in the placement that the second degree is at, it thinks it's the first degree. It thinks it's the first degree because it's in its own world. So when I'm talking about worlds, that's what I mean. I mean its own space. And I said this earlier in the recording, that the reason why I use world is because it's easier to understand in the third dimension what a world is. Because we know what planet Earth is. It's the largest being that we can understand collectively. It's a world. So when I say in society is its own world, and within that world of society you have the family unit, which is its own world, and then you have within the family unit you have the individual, which is its own world. I'm talking about the degrees of the third dimensional frequencies. And once we start getting into the fourth dimension, all I'm really talking about is the next life, is the next realm, is your lower consciousness tapping into your higher consciousness and looking into your higher consciousness. But the fourth dimension, for a totality perspective, is the same as a third dimension, except for instead of the third dimensional frequencies of physicality being represented as the anchor, it'll be the body, or the physicality of the mental will be the anchor. So instead of having three-dimensional frequency as the anchor, it'll be fourth dimensional frequency as the anchor. But understand, when you get to the fourth dimensional frequency being anchored, it will be the same thing as a third dimensional frequency anchor. It's the same thing, except for it's on a higher octave. So instead of on Earth we touch fire and it burns us and it's like ouch, on the fourth dimension we touch fire and we have the experience of the third dimension it burning us, but it doesn't burn us. It's just warm and we feel it, which is why, like, in some spiritual communities they train their bodies on very high mental levels, and they tap into the spirit level, and they're able to walk on fire, or hold their breath for long periods of time. They're able to do certain things that defy the physical body, which natural science now tells us in order to do that, all you have to do is basically practice it. But there are people that do it without the the practice of that we're thinking of, but they do it mentally first, and then they use their mental powers and they employ those mental powers onto the third dimension. Now, the third dimension, if we were to break the third dimension down, like what is the third dimension? We know it has physicality, but within that physicality, if you think about it, that's just one plane. The physicality is just one plane. The physicality is just one dimension. But within that dimension, there's different planes that are added onto that, right? So a plane in math is like a field of view in a sense, where you can plot, you can measure points of spaces, right? But a plane in this instance is more referring to a level of awareness. So in the third dimensional frequencies, and this is why I say third dimensional frequencies and I don't break it down, because it gets very like wordy. But in the third dimensional frequencies, at the lowest level, it's physicality, right? Physicality, it's form. But within that form in itself, like your body in itself, detached from your mind, detached from your emotions, detached from your soul, detached from your spirit, has its own mind, body, and spirit, and emotions and soul. It has its own separate, apart from you, apart from your alchemical mix. It has its own. So this human body on its own has its own spirit, has its own soul, has its own everything. It's its own body without our ego awareness being attached to it. Now, it doesn't make much sense because you're thinking, well, how can it be animate? Well, it's only animate because our awareness allows it to be. But if we lose our mind and we lose our ego, and our ego slips outside of consciousness within the frequency of this body, then it's just a body with that's still animated. So it still has a soul and spirit of life, and it still has emotions. It's just not directed anymore. And you can see that in like patients with like Alzheimer's or dementia. They're still living, but their ego awareness isn't channeling anymore. It isn't channeling into that frequency of that body. So that's why I say the physicality has its own set of metaphysical components, right? But then after the physicality, you have the emotional plane. Now the emotional plane is fused into the plane of physicality. That's where you have your emotions, and then you have your mind, and then you have your soul, then you have your spirit. Now, all of those put together on the emotional plane, on the physical plane, creates the constitution of the human. But just like the physical has all those elements to it as well, your emotional body has all of those elements as well. And I know that doesn't make sense, because it's like, if it's the emotional body, it's just that, it's just the emotions. But we have to understand, we are not one being. We are multiple beings. Like, our emotions by itself is a being. Our physicality in itself is a being. So our beings, as we know it, has a form, it has emotions, it has a mind, it has a soul, and it has a spirit. Why do you think your physical body doesn't have all of those 5 things in a different capacity? Or your emotion doesn't have all of those 5 things in its own capacity? Or the mind or the spirit or the soul doesn't have those things in its own capacity? And the reason why I say that is because I believe in infinite life. I believe in immortality. I believe in eternal nature. So in eternal nature, whether I'm here or not, my body is still going to be my body. My emotions are still going to be my emotions. But they're not going to be necessarily the consciousness of awareness I have now channeling them, but they'll still be in existence without me. Does that make sense? Like, they're separate from me, but they've agreed to be with me. So now we're married into one being. But me talking right now is a compilation of multiple beings talking. It's a compilation of multiple dimensional frequencies converging on each other and expressing itself. And all that's like very, very, very like complex and deep to understand. But what I want to like point out is that since we're multi-dimensional beings, we have multiple frequencies. That also means that in the multiple frequencies that we have, inside those frequencies of multiplicity, there are also multiple frequencies within those. I say all that to eventually get to the point of going from one dimension to the other isn't the goal. Trying to get to the highest dimension or saying, "Oh, I'm a fifth dimensional being." We're all infinite dimensional beings. Like, to specify which dimension we're on just signifies the ignorance that we have. We're all multidimensional beings. If you truly are on the fifth dimensional, like consciousness, your consciousness is fifth dimensional, you're not even on the same level as everybody. You're completely past it. You're completely foreign. You're an alien. Because most people are just now entering into the higher third dimensional realities. And some can tap into the fourth dimensional realities to make their third dimensional realities better. But they don't necessarily use it at the most optimal or purest form in morality to go into higher fourth dimensional realities. Now there are the adepts that are living. I do believe that have a fourth dimensional consciousness and they have third dimensional bodies. But third dimensional, they're anchored in the fourth dimension, but they're manifested in the third dimension, which is basically like saying they're using their mental body to control their physical body. So the same urges and desires that the physical body holds us hostage to, the fourth dimension, it can't. They don't interact with their desires the same. Their desires are completely different. Whether it be adept of the light or adept of the dark, whether you believe in the negative evil forces or the positive good forces, no matter which side of the adept ship you're looking at. I think I lost my thought on that. But I guess circling back is that the dimensions are just intellectual pursuits to specify certain things so you could break it down more to understand what the principles are so you can use it in your daily life moment to moment to try to strengthen those principles so you could understand yourself better.